seconds. It's very nice to see you all and to see some very smiley faces out there. That's very much appreciated. We talk about bringing conditions into being to help joy and metta arise, and certainly conditions are smiling, aren't they? You know, people smile at you and just there's this sort of warmth coming through, which is really, really nice. So because it feels a bit strange to know that I'm spotlighted and that but I've got you on gallery view. And please feel free, you know, if you wish to, just to pop it on gallery view if you just want to see everyone's expressions as well. So do view however you'd like to. Okay, so I think I'll just make a start. Stephen and Johanna can join us in a minute. So welcome to anybody who's joined us since the beginning of the first half, who wasn't welcomed at the outset. So very lovely to see you all. So tonight it's the final talk on the series of what is enlightenment, and I'm going to try and communicate something about that through the example of the Buddha. So as Sadharaja said, it's incredibly difficult, isn't it? Because we're trying to communicate something that actually is an experience. It's not something we can know with our intellectual mind, it's an experience. But it seems the perfect thing really to use the example of the Buddha, you know, just to look at, well, how did the Buddha live his life? So what I've done is I've just chosen a few examples of things that were happening in the Buddha's life or happened in the Buddha's life that for me have been deeply, deeply inspiring. You know, they've really, really communicated something to me. You know, I think from the moment I came along, you know, back in 1997, went along to Peterborough Group, from the outset, I really, really loved the idea of the Buddha, and that the Buddha was a human being who, through the practices, through his determination and courage, his fearlessness and his loving kindness, was able actually to break through, be free from all conditioning, to be free from greed, hatred and delusion. I found that so inspiring right from the outset. I didn't really know what, you know, didn't really know what was being talked about, but something was being conveyed. So I thought I'd just start just a little recap on the Buddha, in a sense, sort of going back pre-enlightenment, when we've got Siddhartha Gautama living in a palace with all of his material needs met. You know, everything he could have wanted in the material world was there for him, you know, and the people, he was loved clearly by what we hear about his life. But he's restless, and then he goes out of the palace walls and sees these four sights. He sees somebody who's sick, and he sees somebody who's old, and then he sees somebody who's dead, or sees a dead body. And then the fourth sight is seeing this wandering mendicant, this wandering holy person, who looks so at peace and so at ease despite everything that's going on around him. And this sets the Buddha off on this quest. And ultimately he decides to leave the palace life and he goes forth, you know, the whole story of he goes forth and he finds teachers, and he very, very quickly learns everything they can teach him, and he experiences delightful mental states, beautiful, beautiful states of consciousness. But whenever he comes back into, when he sort of lands back into life and comes out of meditation, the same quandary is there about this. What do you do about sickness, old age and death? What do you do about suffering? And then he practices these very extreme body mortification, sort of asceticism, until he almost dies. He's on the brink of death, and he realizes he's still not free. And he takes food, and then he has this memory of the rose apple tree, you know. So we've heard all this. This is just little glimpses back. He has this memory of watching his father ploughing, And and then he knows that a different way of sort of working with his mind, a different way. And then he makes this vow to go and sit under the Bodhi tree until he's attained enlightenment. And that's what he does. So through that, we're saying that he's absolutely free of all greed, all aversion, all delusion. He's totally seeing things exactly how they are, and he's in accord with reality, and he's free. So so that's the what we're trying to communicate. So what does the Buddha do? So now if we look at what the Buddha does in his life out of that. So he doesn't go off into a cave. He might have done, you know, he doesn't just sort of go off and he's okay and that's it. He has this experience just after this enlightenment experience of really wondering how could he ever communicate this experience to anybody? How would they ever understand? And I think this is a beautiful, beautiful story, because Brahma Sahampati is said to arise. So Brahma Sahampati is said to be one of the highest gods, and he arrives. Now we can make of that what we like, in a way. Does Brahma Sahampati as a god sort of arrive, or is this a state of the Buddha's mind? And it's said to be, it's thought to be like great compassion is arising in the Buddha's mind as a result of this enlightenment experience. So Brahma Sahampati is said to say to the Buddha that there are beings out there with little dust in their eyes, and without the Buddha's help, because he's now the Buddha, he's the awakened one, without his help they're going to be lost in their suffering. So Brahma Sahampati sort of makes this plea, or this thought is in the Buddha's mind, this sort of thinking, that this compassionate thinking, how do I help other beings? Oh, there's beings who've got little dust in their eyes. And then he has this vision, this sort of cosmic sort of vision of all beings all over the world. They're like lotuses. There's this vast, vast field of lotuses, and that everyone's in a different sort of state. That some are like little sort of bits in the mud in the water, and others are sort of growing up through the water. Others are sort of on top of the water, and others are lifted out of the water. And he sees that all beings have this potential. They're all like a field of lotuses. And I really love that image. I think it conveys something of the quality of his mind, to see that, you know, that every single being is like a lotus. You know what it would be like to have that mental state. I think it's like the metta bhavana supreme or something. You know, it's like when you're at the last stage of the metta, and something's happening in your own experience. Your metta's ignited or something, and then you look out with metta at the world. And so I think this is it to the nth degree sort of thing. So I love that story. And it's like he's freed of all the suffering that comes out of craving for things to be other than what they are. We get pulled around by what we want, what we don't want. It's very painful when things change. And the Buddha's free of this. The Buddha's free of this because he's gone deep, deep, deep investigating his experience. Until he's seen greed, hatred, and delusion for what they really are, and they're transcended. They're transcended. And instead, you've got this sort of vast love, this wisdom, seeing things exactly how they are. So that's sort of one example. the next part of the story that I really love is that, so he's realized he's going to teach, and he gets up from underneath the Bodhi tree, and this tree has sheltered him from the sun. And the Buddha is said to feel absolutely immense gratitude to the tree. And he looks at it, he looks at it and looks at it and looks. I think he even bows to it. And there's something about that. It's like this tree was part of the conditions that made it possible for the Buddha to become enlightened. And he's seeing that everything is absolutely alive and sacred. Everything is, has its own blossoming, like the lotuses, everything. And so he's got this tremendous gratitude for the tree. And it, I think coming out of this sense of freedom, this, that he's free, and there's all this love arising. And it made me think myself, how much gratitude I feel now. I didn't in the beginning. I didn't know what there was to feel grateful about. I really find that quite astonishing now. But I feel so grateful to the teachings, to the Buddha. It's not to the level of the Buddha in this tree, but I have a taste of it. What it feels like to feel grateful, that because I feel more free. I'm not an enlightened being, but I've had tastes of freedom, and I think we all will have had tastes of freedom, or something's pulling us here tonight. So there's something about the Buddha and this gratitude for the tree that I love. And of course he goes off, and he's going to go in search of his teachers, but they've died, because he thinks they will have the least dust, in a way, in their eyes. And then he goes to the ascetics who he's practicing with, and they'd shunned him because of what he'd done, because in their eyes, he'd given up the quest, because he'd taken food. But he goes to them and he teaches them. And one by one, through hearing the teachings about conditionality, each one of them is freed. Each one of them becomes an enlightened being. Okay. So from that, they go out to teach. So the Buddha then goes, he just sets out and he walks and he teaches anybody who wants to hear the Dharma. And he's begging for alms, as all other people are, who are the wandering monks, the bhikkhus. So he's living that life of just walking from place to place, wanting to share the Dharma, giving the teaching to anybody who wants it, to help them become more free. And gradually this you're starting to develop a Sangha, so the Sangha's sort of coming into being. There's more and more people who are going out to teach, and the Buddha's really, really encouraging them, that everyone just go forth and teach, go forth and share the Dharma. And out of that, of course, you've got in that part of the world, you have the rainy season. So this is another element of the Buddha that I really, really love, that says something about the workings of his mind, or his consciousness, his awareness. So the rainy season retreats there, and the Buddha's concerned about any damage to the crops or damage to insects. That by having these monks traipsing around the countryside, so that the tradition is started of these rainy season retreats. So they come together during the rainy season and they meditate and they practice absolutely intensely. And then when the rainy season stops, they go forth. And this is becoming a way of life. And I think there's something again about this, the Buddha, this sense of interconnectedness, this sense of interdependence. Everything is alive, and the Buddha's concern for the crops, for the insects, it goes down to this, the minutest insect, just this concern and love. And I think this can really maybe communicate something about the enlightened mind, what happens in enlightenment. That's very beautiful. Just sort of thinking for us, what happens as we practice, if we get more a sense of this being connected with all beings, with all life. I wonder what effect it's having on each of you. And some of you will be very new, very, very new. But whatever effect the teachings have, or hearing about the Buddha, yeah, I think we can just bring it right into our own experience. And I think it's going back to the fact that the Buddha was a human being who becomes, he becomes enlightened and awakened. And he's given us all of these teachings, and we're on that path too. I think it's what it means to us. Okay, so another quality of the Buddha. So another example of the Buddha's life. This is a story I really, really love. Is the story of Angulimala. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but you can always look it up online. So Angulimala is a very sort of, he's a man who's had a major disappointment. He's been really let down and tricked, and he's ended up, he's gone into the forest and he's become a murderer. He's murdered many, many, many people. And so people are very, very frightened of Angulimala. And Angulimala's waiting for somebody else to come along. And the Buddha knows about Angulimala, and he's warned about it by the people, that they've said that Angulimala's in there, don't enter this forest, don't go in. But the Buddha goes into this forest, and regardless. And sure enough, Angulimala spots the Buddha and then starts to pursue the Buddha. So this is quite a remarkable story. So it's said that what happens is that Angulimala, who's quite an incredibly sort of fit being, starts to run after the Buddha. But he can't catch up with the Buddha. And the Buddha's only walking, the Buddha's just walking at this steady, mindful pace, but Angulimala can't catch him up. So we can, we have to make of this, we can think about this and ponder it in our own minds. What does this mean? So you've got Angulimala running through this forest, wanting to murder the Buddha, and the Buddha's calmly walking. And I'd hope to get an image to show tonight, because there's many images online that you can get, but I couldn't get one to download of this scene. So Angulimala becomes so frustrated because he can't catch the Buddha that he shouts. He starts shouting out. He shouts, "Stop!" So he's telling the Buddha to stop. And the Buddha very calmly turns round to Angulimala and says, "I have stopped. I've stopped harming, and I've stopped hurting people. I've stopped hating all people. And now it's time for you to stop. You need to stop." And something happens in this interaction, and Angulimala is totally, totally stopped. And it's said that he he kneels in front of the Buddha. Something happens. It's like his mind, this sort of hateful, sort of angry mind, is just sort of blown apart by this experience of the Buddha. And I just find this story so remarkable. And Angulimala goes to join the Buddha, and in time he's said to absolutely purify his mind of all hatred, and to eventually become an enlightened being himself. And another part of the story is that this king or this warrior is looking for Angulimala, and he comes to the Buddha's gathering, and the Buddha says that Angulimala's with them and that he's converted, he's become a monk. And this king is absolutely so shocked. Again, his mind is so affected by it, because he said he can't believe that all the force in the world, all the punishments couldn't get Angulimala to change. But the Buddha has just created, just been able to help Angulimala become free from these poisons of the mind. So I just absolutely love that story. I think there's something about the Buddha does something so unexpected, doesn't he? He's walking along calmly. He speaks calmly, directly, fearlessly. He's absolutely fearless. He doesn't feel he's got to protect anything. And this has this sort of shattering effect. And I thought about that. I thought about, what happens for us if somebody does something entirely differently to what you expect. It can sort of stop you in your tracks or something. Somebody can sort of stop you in your tracks. They might sort of say something, just the right thing at the right time or something like that. I think of things that people have said to me, that well, one example is, I think I was talking about this the other night, because Sangha Ketu is the first order member I ever met. And I can remember very, very early on that I was really having a very strong reaction about somebody and talking about it with him. I was in this really sort of quite angry, sort of reactive mode. And he said to me, he said to me, I wonder if you could have done something differently there. And I was really taken aback. I was a bit upset about it because I couldn't see what different thing I could do in the moment. But I've never forgotten it. It was like something else came into my mind, another way. There was another way of doing this, but I hadn't spotted it yet. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's obviously not of this nature of the Buddha and Angulimala, but it's something like that. Somebody says something and your mind is altered. So that's the story of Angulimala. And maybe again it's sort of like thinking about these, maybe any experience of this, of something where something's been said and we suddenly have a very different view, or something maybe we really thought was right, we suddenly think, oh, actually it wasn't, or and we look differently at something, and I think that's something about what the Buddha's teachings have given us, this opportunity to really get to know how your mind operates, how your emotions can drive you, an opportunity to really to work with that and do something entirely differently, very creative. Yeah, so that's the story of Angulimala. So maybe I'll the last example I'll give, bringing it right round. So we had from the Buddha going forth and leaving the palace, and so he's ever since he's been enlightened, he's walked the plains of India, you know, teaching, making a vast difference to so many people's lives, challenging the culture at the time, some of the thinking, really making a vast difference, and then passing down these, you know, we've got these teachings, we're here today because of the Buddha doing all of that. So yeah, walking all those years. And you know, what does that say, you know, about the enlightened mind? That somebody just gives and gives and gives, but it doesn't take anything from him either. It doesn't take anything. It's not an effort. He hasn't got to try. He hasn't got to try to do anything. It's just natural. So yeah, so well, I'll bring us to a close with this particular talk. To the Buddha's death. So the Buddha, like all human beings, a body of flesh and blood, dies, you know, just like all other beings do. So the Buddha dies. And there's some beautiful story, sutras about this. So he was teaching to the very, very end, and Ananda is the person who really is his attendant, has been his attendant for a long, long time. And he really loves the Buddha. Ananda really loves the Buddha. He's not enlightened yet. He's well on the path, but he's not enlightened yet. And he's trying to protect the Buddha. And somebody comes to the Buddha and wants a teaching before he dies. And Ananda tries to protect the Buddha, but the Buddha hears, and he wants this person to come. He wants to teach right through to the end. And then Ananda is finding the whole thing so challenging that the Buddha's going to die. And he says, "He who was so kind," and that's a phrase that has stayed throughout in Buddhism. That the Buddha was just so kind. And so Ananda's weeping, and some of the enlightened beings there aren't weeping, they're aware the Buddha's dying, and they'll have their own feelings around that, but they're not disturbed by it in the way that Ananda is. But the Buddha sends for Ananda because he hears that he's so distressed, and Ananda goes in to see the Buddha. And the Buddha's ever so kind, as he always is. But he says to Ananda, "Did I not teach you that all compounded, conditioned beings, things, all phenomena must come to an end? There's constant change. They must come to an end. And that includes the body of the Buddha. This is how it is. This is how it is. This is what will happen." So I think, you know, just that final teaching sort of really communicates something. You know, just something about the Buddha, this kindness, but so real, so in touch with reality. No fear of death. No fear of that whatsoever. And then, as Sadharaja said, his final words to everyone are, "With mindfulness, strive on. With mindfulness, strive on." So he's encouraging everybody to carry on teaching, just to take the Dharma out for the sake of all beings. So there's some examples of the Buddha, of the Buddha's life, the example the Buddha has set for us, and we can follow in those footsteps, you know, as much as we really wish to. And the Buddha, those stories are all there. You know, we can revisit them and, you know, ponder them and think, well, what do they mean to us? What do they mean to us? Okay, so in a moment we're going to go into groups, and so we can talk about anything from this talk that we like. You know, I've got some questions. I've probably got too many questions to answer, but they're just offerings in a way, offerings for the groups. So the first question, you don't need to write it down because your group leaders will have it. But since you came along, since you started practicing, what's changed? You know, have you noticed any change? Anything changing? Anything about your habits, your views? Do you feel you're becoming any kinder? You know, some of you will be very, very early on in this, but for those of you further down, you know, do you feel you're becoming any kinder? So Sangha says that if we're wondering, are we making any progress? The way to know is that you become kinder. You become more compassionate. You become more understanding, because you understand why people are doing things. You know, why we do the things that we do. So that's a question. And another one is a bit more on the imaginal realm. You may not want to talk about this, but you know, can you imagine your mind or your consciousness sort of transforming? You know, it's a sort of imaginative exercise. And some of you might have experienced tastes of this, but a mind that's vast and full of love, full of wisdom, not afraid, fearless, but entirely free from all greed and hatred. You know, it's gone. Greed, hate, it's gone. But just trying to imagine the mind just set loose, nothing getting in, nothing pulling us around, nothing. Yeah, no aversion, no ill will. Just imagine it. You know, again, it's a bit like the metta bhavana. Okay, so that'll give us something to occupy us in the groups. So we'll come